Okay, welcome to Nested Loops. We're doing chapter 7 of Shape Up. So, Don is ready. I'll let him go.
All right, this is Shape Up Chapter 7, Bets, Not Backlogs. So no backlogs. Now that we've written a pitch or multiple pitches, the question is, where do they go? How do you organize them? And the answer is not into a backlog. Backlogs are weight that we don't need to carry, because eventually dozens and hundreds of tasks pile up, and we know we don't have time for all of them. They waste time reviewing, grooming, and organizing old ideas, and they prevent anyone from moving forward in the projects that really matter right now. So what do we do instead? Before each 6-week cycle, we hold a betting table where stakeholders decide what to do in the next cycle. In that meeting, they look at pitches from the last 6 weeks, or any pitches that somebody purposely revived and lobbied for again. Nothing else is on the table, just a few well-shaped, risk-reduced options to review. And now those pitches are potential bets. So with just a few options in a 6-week-long cycle, the meetings are really short, infrequent, and intensely productive. And if you decide to bet on a pitch, it goes into the next cycle to build, but if you don't, you let it go. So then there's a question, what if the pitch was really good, but the time just wasn't right? Maybe there weren't enough developers available, or something else had a higher priority. Well, the solution is that anyone who wants to advocate for that pitch again would track it independently and then lobby for it 6 weeks later. So this creates decentralized lists where everyone's keeping track of things they care about instead of having a single backlog. So we don't have to choose between a burdensome backlog and not remembering anything from the past. Everyone can still track pitches, requests, or other things independently without a central backlog. That means that support can keep track of common issues, product managers can track ideas that they hope to shape into a future cycle, and programmers can maintain lists of bugs they'd like to fix. But there's no single backlog or central list, and none of these lists are direct inputs into the betting process. They first have to become pitches before they can be in the betting process. Then throughout the cycles, you can have regular but infrequent one-on-ones between departments to help cross-pollinate ideas for what to do next and produce new pitches. This approach spreads out the responsibility for prioritizing and tracking what to do and makes it manageable. People from different departments can advocate for whatever they think is important and use whatever method works for them to track those things decentrally. This way the conversation is always fresh. Anything brought back has context and a purpose. And important ideas will come back. They say it's really easy to overvalue ideas because they're cheap. People are always coming up with ideas, putting them in big piles in the backlog. Then you have to organize them, decide, go pick through, find the things that are really important. But the book suggests that really important ideas will always come back to you. And when's the last time you forgot a really great, inspiring idea and just never brought it up again? Now it's possible that a bug comes up, and it happens from time to time. Well, if that bug never happens again, maybe it wasn't really a problem. And if it does happen again, then it can be brought up in a later cycle. So that was really short first chapter, really straightforward. So I had some discussion, maybe some things we can talk about with this approach of kind of a decentralized backlog instead of having a single centralized backlog where everybody keeps track of things. One thing I was wondering is who keeps steadily producing pitches for the whole company to fill everyone's time if it's decentralized.
I mean, again, based on the way they explain it, there's a dedicated, like separate pitch versus development tracks.
Correct, yeah.
So obviously the pitch. Now, while it seems like anyone could pitch, there seems to be people who are the dedicated pitchers.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody that really produces pitches.
Yeah, I think it's kind of everybody's producing pitches.
Right.
And we'll talk about it in the next chapter, that there's this, what Forrest mentioned, kind of a dedicated time for a development cycle versus a kind of a break time, a cool down time for working on pitches and ideas and sometimes bug fixes. But yeah, I guess the question is like, what happens when you get to planning for a cycle and there's not enough pitches? Maybe that never happens in their case.
Well,
that everyone's always pushing enough for things.
I'm trying to think of a company that would hit this stage where, hey, we have some product and we're doing it, and oh, guess what? We ran out of stuff to do. Like,
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, this doesn't follow this project. It's just one of these scenarios. I think it could possibly happen. I just can't see what it would be.
Yeah, I guess it's not the running out of things to do that I'm thinking about so much as it's
There's no
having them
prepared pitch.
formally defined in time for the meeting
Right.
consistently.
And I don't think that if you're gonna do this method, I think you need to have that parallel pitch track. Like someone has to be watching that there are pitches to be coming. If there's not it's like I think every company sort of has at least some kind of visionary or someone with a vision on what we're doing. So arguably it's that person or persons.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
For your second bullet,
Yeah. So the second's what are the drawbacks of decentralized lists?
I find it's like I'm just trying to contemplate. I don't know that could work for us. I think it could work for some teams. That idea that the important stuff will come back, so you don't have to keep a list. And per your third bullet, it feels a little fragile to me.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is like, let's say that somebody knows about maybe some update that needs to be done, but there just isn't time to do it this 6 weeks. Well, 6 weeks is a long time. So what if that person leaves and nobody wrote it down?
Yeah.
Then it doesn't get done.
Well, I think like if it's a really good idea, more than one people are gonna keep track of it, right?
I guess if there's enough exposure, but as we'll see, the pitches don't necessarily go to everybody. They only go to a select group. I know that's not in this chapter yet, but something I was thinking about is, yeah,
Like
I don't know how
But
you spread it out.
you still have a group. It's not like in a vacuum. Like if I do the pitch and it's a great pitch and everything, am I the only one that believes it's a good pitch?
I guess it depends on the size of the team. It might be that you're the only one with the idea, and you produce the pitch, and nobody else was exposed to that idea outside of you. I guess you would hopefully talk to people about it, but then
Right.
I could see some situations where things are really competitive and you don't talk about these ideas. I don't know. I guess this is envisioning a system where that doesn't exist. But
Right. Like I think like the one thing, like maybe there's not a backlog of stuff, but the pitch itself, maybe it's in a Google Doc and it's accessible for everybody. So that's the way, like it doesn't get lost, right?
yeah, I guess if you're making it very organized, maybe either that hasn't been gone over, or I missed the details of like how you would organize those things.
Yeah. Well, it seems like the key thing, the key driver is always like what's what I'm looking for? A champion. Right? The pitch always has a champion, and it's kind of up to the champions to make sure the pitch is viable. If the champion wants the job to happen, he's got to make the pitch. He's got to bring it back up. And that's kind of good because if there's always a champion for something, hopefully it'll happen. But it just seems like, for us, it's like, well, the negative of the central list is you get like, us in our giant ice box, which we have to constantly read. That's the bad side of it. But the good side of it is that you keep stuff. We go back, oh, we do need to do this. We just forgot about it.
Right.
Or in our case, it's like our security. We have so many bullets for our security updates because we have so many, not security, but maintenance and that stuff. It's like we have to keep that list because it's not always on the top of our brain.
I guess that then becomes a centralized list, right? And then to what Diego was saying, if you had all the pitches in a centralized place, then is that now a centralized list?
Right, but if that person leaves, then I guess, well, so you have a central list, you still have the pitch even if the champion leaves.
Yeah, I was saying if all the pitches go into like Google Docs that are stored in one place, then now it's centralized.
Right.
Well, it's not specifically a list, but it,
Right.
those are the document, right? Like you keep your own list of things that you want to, but like the pitches don't get lost.
Yeah, so it's just more of like a historical thing. It's still centralized, but it's not something that you go to directly for planning.
Right.
Like you do a backlog.
Exactly. Like a backlog, you do have to groom and everything. You have all of those things, but this is kind of like have a library, and like we're pitching. Principally, it's kind of like we're pitching for about this book, and we want to read it all together. I mean, we're gonna read this other book. Okay, I'm gonna put the book is still in the library. We got it, and I'm gonna repitch it next time. And if 3 people liked it, all 3 people are like, "Hey, we're all okay with this." Like I lead, fine. But the other 2 people, I'm gonna go. Oh, I still like that book. I'm gonna keep it under my radar. I think that's kind of how it works.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, we'll move on to the next chapter. Shape up chapter 8, the betting table. 6-week cycles. So working in cycles, sorry, there's kind of a typo here. What they said in the book was that they work in cycles to give a standard project size for both shaping and scheduling. If you didn't have a standard cycle size, you could have multiple teams that are out of sync. Like let's say one team's in a 2-week cycle, one's in a 3-week cycle, or maybe they're all in 3-week cycles, but they're out of sync. That makes it really difficult to plan and to make sure people are available. So they've decided to have a standard cycle size and a standard start point for all teams. So a 2-week cycles or sprints, they found were too short to get anything meaningfully done, and are extremely costly due to planning overhead, like weekly planning meetings, all that kind of stuff we're used to with our sprints. So they wanted a cycle that would be long enough to finish a whole project start to end, but short enough to see the end from the beginning and not lose focus. And after a few years of experimenting, they arrived at 6-week cycles. But if you're running for 6 weeks back to back, and then another 6 weeks, there wouldn't be any time to breathe and think about what's next. Where would you get your pitches from to know what to do next? So at the end of a cycle, also at the end of a cycle is the worst time to meet and plan because everyone's trying to hit their deadlines. So at the end of each 6-week cycle, they schedule 2 weeks for a cool down where they can consider what to do next. And during those cool downs, everyone's free to work on whatever they want. People can spend their time fixing bugs, exploring new ideas, or trying out new technical possibilities. They also roughly standardize the types of projects and teams that will be involved in bets. Project teams consist of one designer and either 1 or 2 programmers, and then they're joined by a QA person who does integration testing later in the cycle. So it's pretty standard sizing for teams in general. Then the teams will either work on a single 6-week project, which is called a big batch team, or multiple smaller projects, which is called a small batch team. The small batch projects are usually 1 or 2 weeks, and they're not scheduled individually, so it's up to the team to decide how to juggle the work and ship everything by the end of the cycle. Which brings us to the betting table. The betting table is a meeting that's held during the cooldown while stakeholders decide what to do next in the cycle. Only the newly shaped pitches or revived pitches are considered as potential bets. So in order for a pitch to be revived, somebody would have to go get it from previous meetings and put it forward again. The meeting only lasts 1 or 2 hours so that you don't waste time and everybody has a chance to study the pitches beforehand. And at Basecamp, their betting table consists of the CEO, CTO, a senior programmer, and a project strategist. Only 4 people in the whole meeting. And they output a cycle plan based on the pitches they select. Between everyone present, there's knowledge of who's available, what the business priorities are, and what kind of work they've been doing lately, and that all influences which bets will be picked. But what's the meaning of a bet? We talk about betting instead of planning because it sets different expectations. First of all, bets have a payout. We expect something meaningful to be finished and not just to fill time. Also, bets are commitments. If we bet 6 weeks, we commit to give the team that entire 6 weeks and not to interrupt them. And then smart bets have a cap on the downside. That means that if you bet 6 weeks, then the most you can lose is 6 weeks. We don't keep spending multiples of the same original estimate for something that's not worth the price. And then explain this a little bit more, the uninterrupted time part of that. Whenever you make a bet, you honor it, and you don't allow the team to be interrupted or pulled away. Momentum and progress are second-order things like growth and acceleration. So when you pull someone away for one day, you don't just lose the day, you lose the momentum that they built up and the time it takes them to regain that momentum. And there's a good quote they had, which is, losing the wrong hour can kill a day, and losing a day can kill a week. So if something else does come up, we still don't interrupt the team. The maximum time that we'd have to wait to do something that just came up and is fairly urgent is 6 weeks. Then we'll be able to act on that new problem or idea. Now, there's a possibility that it's a real crisis, and we can always hit the brakes on everything, but those crises are very rare. Another aspect of the bet is the circuit breaker. So the teams are required to ship the work within the amount of time that they bet. If they don't finish, then by default, the project doesn't get an extension. That intentionally creates a risk that the project, as it was pitched, will not happen. And that also eliminates the risk of runaway projects that take 2, 3, or more times the amount of time that was originally allotted for them. And we think of that like a circuit breaker, so it keeps one project from overloading the entire system. And if that project doesn't finish in 6 weeks, it means that we did something wrong during shaping. And in that case, we need to reframe the problem and avoid whatever rabbit hole we fell into in the first try. At that point, it could be repitched and continued. And the circuit breaker motivates the team to take more ownership over their projects, as they're given full responsibility for executing projects, including making trade-offs and choosing where to cut the scope. So then you may ask, what about bugs? Well, there's nothing special about bugs that makes them automatically more important than everything else. The question is, how severe are they? If data is being lost, the app's grinding to a halt, or there's a huge swath of customers that are seeing the wrong thing, then sure, we'll drop everything and fix it. But that's actually rare. But we still need a way to deal with bugs on a regular basis, and 3 strategies that work for Basecamp. First is to use the cooldown to work on bugs. So when you're in your rest periods and you're trying to figure out new pitches, that kind of thing, it's a good time to work on a few bugs that you've been tracking throughout the last cycle. Another idea is to bring it to the betting table. So if it's a huge bug and it's not going to be able to be fixed during the cooldown, you could actually pitch it as a project. And maybe it's only 2 weeks and it can be given to a small batch team. But the point is, if it's bigger than the time you can allot during cooldown, then it has to go to the betting table. And the third is scheduling a bug smash, which is where we dedicate an entire cycle to fixing various bugs. And they mentioned that they usually do this during the holidays. And the most important thing here in these cycles is to keep the slate clean. The key to managing capacity is giving ourselves a clean slate with every cycle and to never carry scraps of old work over to future cycles. If we get a brilliant idea or urgent request, then we just keep it in our heads and in side channel discussions until the cycle is over. Again, goes back to the really important things you'll remember or you'll write down and you won't lose track of them if they're really important to you. If a project's too big for one cycle, then it could also be shaped into 2 smaller targets to reduce risk and get something fully working at the end of the first cycle. Then, if you like the progress, you can bet on the second 6 weeks for that project. The advantage here is you actually get something at the end of the cycle, and then you can decide, hey, is it worth it to actually finish it or not, or delay it. But the important thing is that we always shape what the end looks like for the cycle, and we always keep our options open to change course. And that's the end. So I had some discussion questions. First is that with this betting table, there's not that many people involved at the betting table. So I guess how do bets affect long-term high-level business goals, and how does it scale for larger organizations?
I mean, it's interesting to me if you look at their betting team. It's basically Jason Fried, DHH, a programmer, and I forgot what the fourth person was. But it is kind of like the strategical people. So those are the ones that approve the bets, and those are the ones that arguably know what the long-term business goal is. So I'm wondering if they have some sort of big map that they grab those bets and they sprinkle them. Oh, well, we're trying to get here, so we'll do this, this, and this.
Because it seems like somebody would have to pitch it for it to be considered. And so then if you had, goals for 6 months or a year, which is, common with larger organizations, then...
That's a good question. It's worth saving some of these. So I was thinking throughout this, because at the end, when we get to ask questions from Ryan, we should jot them down. I'm already thinking the opposite of this is I won't remember all the questions if I don't write them down. So, but that's an interesting thing. Yeah. So when you're scaling, how does betting table scale for large organizations? I think that's a good question to throw to him, and I don't know if they would know because they're organizations.
Because it says that there are only 4 people at the table, but wouldn't, and Duncan, I think he said the same thing. Wouldn't the pitching person be there to pitch?
Yes.
No. The pitches are all given beforehand. They mentioned that for the betting table, you're given time to review pitches before the betting table. So that would, I guess they're in document form somehow.
All right. So a person is not there to, I guess they review the pitches before the betting table. They're submitted, and if I have a question, I just ask a question at that point. And then at the betting table, there's nobody there to answer.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess they have to be really well defined, or not. They mentioned that the teams have a lot of flexibility as they work through the cycle to solve problems and make adjustments.
Yeah, there's a lot of details there. They don't go over in the book.
Yeah. Another thing I was thinking is that maybe you would do multiple betting tables for different parts of the organization, if it's a large organization. But then that still comes back to the first discussion question, which is what about high-level business goals? Are you letting someone from outside of these teams pitch the really long-term goals? Maybe to some sort of manager or somebody that's within the smaller betting tables?
Well,
or how does that work?
Even if there are multiple departments and multiple things, there's like if there are multiple departments, there's always somebody on top, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they will have meetings with the person on top. The person tells them where the direction in general. So they each can make their own decision, knowing where we're going. So yeah, I don't think that's a big problem, like the general direction of the company. It's like operation and sales and marketing, they don't live in a vacuum. There's a CEO and other people that generally talk to them and say, this is what I want, this is the direction. And then they'll do the pitch. They'll pick the pitches based upon that. And the pitches they don't conform with what the direction is, they just don't get picked. That to me makes sense. I do like the cool down period, and I don't know, 6 weeks seems like a very long time.
To not fix a bug.
I
the
think
nature of our bugs is they're almost all the bugs that we drop everything always have to do with payment.
Right, like when I was working in Norwegian, I did like the 2 weeks, which was really a 4 weeks period, but because the release was kind of staggered off by 2 weeks, right? So it was 2 weeks development, and then you move on to the next 2 weeks of development. But after 2 weeks of development, we're going to 2 weeks of QA. So the release day of something you finish today, it will be deploying in 2 weeks. And I personally like the 2 weeks development because you can get a lot of stuff done in 2 weeks. Makes it also like there's less meetings, like less sprint review and planning, all that kind of stuff. Postmortem, it might be a little bit harder to remember. So like everything that went wrong or right. So like even 6 weeks, I feel like it will be very hard to do that.
Maybe it's because if you're focused on a single thing for 6 weeks, you're going to remember. Yeah, because part of this is that you're not being pulled away for other tasks. So maybe a postmortem is more possible when you're doing one thing for 6 weeks. But if you were like a small batch team and you've done 6 projects in 6 weeks, it's going to be much harder to have a retrospective.
Go ahead.
Also, this brings back because we're talking about all the meetings involved in sprint planning and retros and stuff, is they were saying those are kind of time waste. But then when they introduced the cooldown period every 6 weeks, that's 2 weeks of unstructured time. So does the cooldown period make this less efficient than week or 2 week sprints? I'm not sure about that.
No, I think it's kind of needed, like to have the cooldown to recharge yourself, really.
I think so too, but I'm just thinking in terms of time. Because, for example, we do 1 week sprints, and we obviously have planning meetings, that kind of stuff, stand-ups that we do, and those can be time that we don't get as much done. But on the other hand, we're not taking 2 weeks of time completely unstructured. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it depends. Depends on team. It depends on the work. I think when I look at like this whole process, I go, I think we can learn some things, and maybe for like ops sector, we can do more of this. But depending on how your company is structured or what they do, I think affects this. Like this idea of that anyone can pitch and then you don't remember, I don't think that works. Some companies just can't do that. Like I can't imagine virus checking company. Let's do this. It's not just ideas. There's things that you have to do. You know what I mean? It depends on the company. Or like government contracting. You're gonna build a satellite for defense network or something. It's like you don't just get to pitch random ideas. There's a certain kind of company that anyone can pitch at. There's a certain kind of company. You know what I mean? There's So as we go through, I'm looking at what ideas can we use. Like I don't think for our main work we get to pitch that much, which is another reason kind of why I'm looking at the ops sector when we have space to get a little more of that. If I want to ask Jeff, would it be good if our other departments came to our features and they shaped their stuff more per some of these guidelines? sometimes I think we get stuff that really doesn't have the kind of expected outcome that is constrained by, well, look, you got 6 weeks to do this, so what's really the most important? Like a lot of what I see is some of the features that come our way is they're just kind of like people throwing stuff on the wall. We think this might work. Can you build this for us? Let's do this. Like a lot of times we go, oh, why are you building that? Well, because they want to. And you know, kind of like without divulging any details, this new product, as far as I can tell, it looks just like another product we already have plus another product. So why are we making this thing? What's the outcome? Are we getting our, per the betting thing, are we getting our expectations or money back because we're going to put a certain amount of effort into something?
Yeah, no, it'll be great for both products as well as any kind of elaborate site features to go through some kind of planning process before it comes to us. Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't even matter the methodology, but just any kind of planning process. And we're trying to really do that with mass market, you know, mostly just with forms and meetings, trying to make them think about a few things before they do stuff. So there's always more. Absolutely.
All right, you're breaking up a lot, but I think we got the gist.
Yeah. I have two questions or comments. If you had a very large company, like thousands of employees, and you had many teams, like let's say 35 teams, could you have a team or two that are not applied against these rules and they just work on bugs?
Yeah. Those will be the short bets team or whatever it's called, right? I personally think like it will get old quickly, so like you will probably want to rotate that. I could see actually have a 6-week cycle team and like, or maybe a bunch of them for 6 weeks, and then a rotating team that will be on a different cycle, a much shorter cycle, right? Like a 1 week or 2 weeks. Because like, yeah, not all urgent things can wait 6 weeks or 8 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. Although, you know, that 2 week cool down, like if something comes up, it just gets done. Last point, vacation, they're scheduled generally, so I think like the bats will be scheduled around those.
Yeah, I guess the
like if you have a vacation coming, you're not gonna be in a big batch.
Right. Yeah. If you were in then a small batch team, that would make more sense.
No.
So yeah, you have to schedule pretty far in advance. I always think back to a previous job that I had where I was in a client meeting and they said, yeah, Don's going to work on this for the next 4 weeks straight. Well, this was December. It was the first I heard about it. And I still had vacation. I was like, hey, you can't commit to full, like that long of a time very consistently, I think, is difficult.
Right. Family emergencies, there's nothing that you can do about that.
Sure.
And turnover is kind of...
But that is an interesting question. Let's say a family emergency happens and then we don't make the 6 week.
Right.
Now, arguably, do you go, well, in this case, we will make an exception and go past the 6 weeks because, Don's car blew up or whatever.
You probably pull somebody from a small batch into the big one. Like that's what I would do. I would put someone from the small batch into the, in case of emergency.
But if you don't have a small batch.
Yeah, I was gonna say you have to have enough teams then to have consistently have multiple small batch and big batch teams.
And then the small batch thing doesn't get made. Do you roll that one over?
Yeah, whatever it doesn't get done.
Right, but then we fall back in the whole thing. We're trying to eliminate the backlog.
Right, but like, what would you rather, miss, right? A 6 week project or a couple of 1 week project? I would rather miss the 1 or 2 weeks project than screw up on the 6th one. That's the way I would handle it, but it's like the 6-week project to find another 6-week period. It's gonna be hard, and like if we have time for a small batch, like maybe the 1 or 2 week thing can go during the cool down, or not. There's definitely a smaller thing. I saw like the losing wrong hour can kill a day, losing a day can kill a week. I do believe that. Why you put it there as a discussion?
What was that?
I agree that losing the wrong hour can kill a day.
Yeah. I would just say I just had that in there to bring that up again. That interruptions can be very costly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Super costly. Like for me, it's because like sometimes like when somebody tells me something or interrupts with something, I keep thinking about that thing. Like, oh, run his report or whatever, and then I keep looking more and more into it. Longer than the request was done. So sometimes it's my whole afternoon.
Yeah. That's something that we need to. You have to push up to management. A lot of management doesn't realize that. Oh, I just asked you a question. Yeah, but now I completely lost track. A lot of the things that we do, it's like, oh no, I need to hunker down for an hour or two to understand everything. And if you go and make me answer a call in that time, I'm going to lose it all, and then I won't be able to get back in the groove. And now it's 6 o'clock.
Right.
And so a lot of times they really don't understand that. But so the idea that I think is the most appealing is this sort of circuit breaker thing, which is part like, well, the word they used was something like, oh, we don't want something to do, ends up being 2 or 3 times the cost of what we thought we would do, which seems to plague us a lot on certain issues. And I think the way they do that partly is, one, the shape up part is you pre-prepare the scope and the idea and the implementation things enough that it can fit in the 6 weeks. But then you also have the risk of, if you don't actually finish it, that they toss it. And I think no one wants to toss anything. So that being said, I keep looking at this idea. I like the idea. I'm just not certain if we can do exactly that, so that we don't have these things that run week in, week over, as often happens in these short iteration organizations. Sometimes maybe the solution is just having a hammer and taking a finger every time. No, boom. But okay, so any other questions, discussion, comments?
I'm thinking about it again. Circuit breaker. Would that be like I'm thinking circuit breaker in terms of the family emergency and all that? Does it mean that like let's say somebody leaves the team or something happened and this person is not available? The circuit breaker idea would be, well, instead of not doing it, and we don't have anybody who can pull from anything else, we just cut down the features, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a situation where, let's say it's like a big batch team or a large batch team, and you have 2 programmers, 1 designer, so then there's presumably, let's say that either the designer or 1 programmer gets pulled off of that for whatever reason, they leave, personal reason, whatever, then you have somebody to rework it during the cycle, right? And they said that you can make adjustments and cut scope and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So it's possible. But if it's a smaller team where it's 1 pair, it might be more difficult.
Right. Like if it's just like a designer and developer leaves.
Right. Or vice versa, right?
Right. Yeah.
I guess, I mean, like you said, that's always going to happen, but then you're losing 6 weeks. Right.
Also, yeah, you lose the 6 weeks, but also, this is the exception to the rule, right? We're talking about how you handle extraordinary cases, like a family emergency and turnover. If it happens, like even like if you think about it, we're talking about 2 month periods. You got 6 6 cycles really in a year. It cannot happen more than 6 times a year, and if it does happen 6 times a year, you have an extremely high churn rate. like the place sucks to work at.
I guess that's why this is it's called a bet. Is you're betting it's gonna have a positive outcome,
Right.
and a lot of things can go wrong. But
Yeah, a lot of things can go wrong in a 6 week period. Like for example, yesterday I was joking around and I accidentally smacked my toe and I might have broken it. Huh? Yeah, I'm gonna discuss later how I did it. This is like one of the dumbest things I've done so far.
Oh, a lot of things can go wrong.
Yeah, I like it.
Well, that's all I've got.
All right, cool. So who hasn't gone? Has anyone not gone? Are we back to anyone who wants to be next before we roll over the
On for this book yet. I will go. What chapter is next?
next one is 8. Is it 8?
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9. Is it long? I haven't looked forward. Is that one?
I didn't look at the whole thing.
It's like 6 pages, so 10 is 1. Maybe 9 and 10.
Yeah, 10 is fairly short, so I'll do both.
Okay, 9 and 10. 2 weeks. We'll see you then. I look forward to your slides. All right.
Thank you.
See ya. There's my nose. Stop on broadcast.